people, next witness.
At this time, the people call Deborah Tarasoff.
Witness entering courtroom. Remain standing. Raise your right hand. Face the clerk. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are going to give before this court and jury shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Do you so swear or affirm?
I do.
Thank you. Have a seat. Pull your chair all the way up. State your full name, spelling your last name.
Deborah Tarasoff, Tarasoff.
County of residence.
Westchester County.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You may inquire.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
If you remember, try to speak slowly and into the microphone. That will be great. Ms. Tarasoff, are you employed?
Yes, I am.
Where do you work?
For the Trump Organization.
And where is the Trump Organization?
725 Fifth Avenue.
How long have you worked there?
24 years.
What is the Trump Organization?
It's a company that deals in real estate.
And who is the owner of the Trump Organization?
Correct me if I am wrong, Mr. Trump.
I just quickly want to ask you, are you here today with your attorneys?
Yes.
And do you know who is paying for your attorneys?
Yes.
Who is paying for your attorneys?
The Trump Organization.
I think you said you have been at the Trump Organization around 24 years?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about your educational background?
Just high school.
What did you do after high school?
I went to work.
Where did you work?
I do believe my first job was with Liberty Mutual. Then I went to a company. It was a lawyer, and he dealt with real estate and parking lots and garages in the city.
What kind of work did you do for the lawyer?
The lawyer, I paid bills also.
And how long did you do that?
17 years.
And then did you stop working?
Yes.
Why did you stop working?
I took care of my daughters.
Did there come a time that you went back to work?
Yes.
When was that?
In '99 when my husband passed away.
And did you go straight to the Trump Organization at that time?
No, I went in 2000.
So you did something else for a year?
I stayed home with the girls.
Is the Trump Organization made up of a number of entities?
Yes.
Where is the Trump Organization headquartered?
Now or before?
Well, let's start with now.
Now, well, technically I think it is in Florida.
How about back in the time frame of 2015, 16, and 17?
725 Fifth Avenue.
Here in Manhattan?
Yes.
Do you have any sense of how many entities make up the Trump Organization?
There is a bunch.
Over 100?
I think close to it, yes.
What was your title when you started at the Trump Organization?
Accounts payable.
And what is your title now?
Accounts payable supervisor.
Do you have you a work-issued email address?
Yes.
Has it been the same since you started?
No.
Do you recall what it was when you started?
What was it before?
Yes.
Yes, it was D. Tarasoff.
And was the domain name trumporg.com?
Yes.
And that changed?
It just added the full name now, Deborah Tarasoff.
Okay, does everyone you work with have a Trump.org email domain?
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the departments and people at the Trump Organization. You work in accounts payable?
Yes.
Is that part of the accounting department at the Trump Organization?
Yes.
Where did the accounting department sit, or where did it sit in the period of 2015 to 2017?
Same location where we've always been.
Which is where?
On the 26th floor.
What else is on the 26th floor?
The legal department and Mr. Trump's office.
And that's at the address you gave us earlier, 275 Fifth Avenue.
Yes.
Do you know somebody named Rebecca Minocchio?
Yes, I do.
Who is she?
She was an administrative assistant at that time. Now she works in accounts receivable.
Do you know someone named Alan Garton?
Yes.
Who is he?
He's a lawyer.
And how long have you known him?
For as long as he's worked there.
Do you know somebody named Michael Cohen?
Yes.
Who was Michael Cohen?
He was a lawyer that worked there.
Did he work there in the period of 2015 until early 2017?
Yes.
Where did he sit when he worked there?
He sat in 2 different locations.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Outside my office, there is another office right next to it. He sat there. And then he moved to the other side of the floor.
Of the 26th floor?
Of the 26th floor.
Do you know Jeffrey McConney?
Yes.
Who is Jeffrey McConney?
He is the assistant controller.
Did you work closely with Jeff McConney?
Yes, I did.
How long has he been at the Trump Organization, if you know?
He was there before me.
For longer than 24 years?
Yes.
Were you familiar with how he usually did things at work?
Yes.
Did you go to him with questions about expenses?
Yes.
Can you just tell us a little bit more about what you do in accounts payable? What does that mean and what do you do?
I get approved bills. I enter them into the system and I cut the checks and I mail them out. I used to.
And I apologize, I am jumping around a little bit here. I want to go back to Mr. McConney. Do you know what his title was back in 2016 or 2017?
I do believe it's assistant controller.
Did Mr. McConney oversee everything in the accounting department?
Yes.
Who is Alan Weisselberg?
He was the CFO.
When you say he was the CFO, is he no longer at the company?
Correct.
How closely did you work with Alan Weisselberg?
About the same as Jeff. A little less, maybe.
What was Mr. Weisselberg's management style?
He had his hands in everything.
Did you withdraw? Did he interact with Mr. Trump often, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, yes.
And now, speaking about that time period of 2015 to early 2017, did he interact with Mr. Trump often back then?
Yes.
Do you know somebody named Rona Graff?
Yes.
Who is Rona Graff?
She was Mr. Trump's assistant.
With respect to Mr. Trump, did you work directly with Mr. Trump?
No?
Did you see Mr. Trump around the office back in the time period of 2015 to early 2017?
Yes.
You said earlier that back in 2015 to 2017, Mr. Weisselberg, it was your sense that he spoke to Mr. Trump frequently, is that right?
Yes.
Do you know if Mr. Weisselberg liked to run financial decisions by Mr. Trump before engaging in particular actions?
From my knowledge, yes.
I want to talk a little bit now about your role in accounts payable, which you described for us earlier. Do you have a lot of decision-making authorities in your role as accounts payable supervisor?
No.
Back in 2015 to 2017, that time period, did you have a lot of decision-making authority then?
No.
Did you pretty much just follow instructions?
Yes.
Would you hear about it if you incorrectly made a mistake to follow instructions?
Yes.
Who would you hear about it from?
It could be whoever gave me the bill, that I paid it wrong.
Who would that have been most often?
It could have been Mr. Weisselberg. It could have been Jeffrey McConney, the legal department, if they said I paid it wrong.
In the period of 2016 and 2017, who did you report to?
Basically Jeffrey McConney.
When it came to handling the accounts payable, how many entities, if you know, did you handle accounts payable for?
50 to 60, maybe more.
And did you do your job the same way with respect to all of these entities?
Yes.
You explained to us what accounts payable is. What is accounts receivable?
Accounts receivable, you get the money in. Accounts payable, you give it out.
And are you familiar with the term general ledger?
I am.
What is the general ledger?
That's what everything goes into, and they keep track things.
When you say everything goes into...
Accounts receivable and accounts payable. Any transactions.
Did you make entries yourself through an accounting system into the general ledger?
Yes, the accounts payable.
Do you remember the name of that accounting system?
Multidata MDS.
Can you briefly describe the process that you would use back in 2016 and 2017 when you got an invoice to pay an accounts payable?
I would get it when it's approved. I would enter it into the accounting system. I would cut the check, get it signed, and mail it out.
And is that essentially the same process that you had used for your entire career at the Trump Organization?
Yes.
You said an invoice would be approved?
Yes.
Who could approve invoices?
Alan Weisselberg, Jeffrey McConney. Obviously, Mr. Trump. Anybody in the legal department.
And for these questions, I pretty much want to focus on the time period 2016-2017. Is that okay?
Sure.
Is that answer accurate for that time period?
Yes.
Did the dollar amount of an invoice impact who could approve it?
Yes.
How?
If it was under a certain amount, Alan would have approved it. If it was over, it would have to be approved by somebody higher up.
Who was higher up than Alan Weisselberg?
It would be Eric Trump, Don Jr., or Mr. Trump.
One of the Trumps?
Yes.
Do you recall in the time period of 2016 to 2017 what that dollar amount was that would have to be approved? To what amount could Alan Weisselberg approve an invoice?
Before 2015, it was $2,500. After that, it was $10,000.
So anything over that amount had to be approved by Mr. Trump or Eric Trump or Don Dr. Trump?
Yes.
We talked a little bit about the general ledger. Did each of the entities that you handled at the Trump Organization have its own general ledger?
Yes.
And did it have a code that associated it with or that you would enter for each entity into the general ledger?
Yes.
As part of your responsibilities in accounts payable, did you handle accounts payable for an entity called DJT?
Yes.
What was that?
DJT is Mr. Trump's personal account.
And did that account have its own general ledger?
Yes.
And that is back in 2015, 16, 17?
Yes.
And you process the accounts payable for that account the same way you for all the other accounts?
Yes.
And did you cut checks from that account?
Yes.
Do you recall withdrawn? Once you cut a check, what would you do with it?
Which account?
Let's say from the DJT account back in 2017, 2016, 2017, that time period?
Before he was president or after?
Let's start with before.
Before, I would cut the check, put it together with the backup, and bring it over to Rona, so she would bring it in to Mr. Trump to sign.
You said put it together with the backup?
The invoice.
Was there ever more than an invoice, or was it usually just an invoice?
Basically, it's just an invoice.
And how would you put the check together with the invoice?
Just put the check on top of the invoice, staple it, and bring it over.
And you said you would bring it over to Rona?
Yes.
At some point, would you get those back?
Yes.
Were they in the same condition when you got them back?
They would be signed.
And were the invoice and the check still stapled together?
Yes.
Did you have a general practice? Would you staple the check on top of the invoice, or the invoice on top of the check, or did it vary?
The check is on top of the invoice.
And withdrawn. Were you responsible for reimbursing expenses to vendors?
Yes.
Did you generally require proof of an expense?
Yes.
What kind of expense?
The backup receipt.
And how much would the Trump Organization usually reimburse when an employee incurred an expense?
Whatever amount it was.
So, if an employee incurred an expense of $100, how much would the Trump Organization reimburse?
$100.
Now, you talked a little bit about invoices. I want to talk a little bit about who could sign checks, particularly for the DJT account. Who could sign checks for the DJT account in 2016 or 2017?
You are talking about Mr. Trump's personal account?
Yes.
Only Mr. Trump.
Was that true back in 2016 and 2017?
Yes.
If you know, is that still true today?
Yes, it is.
That was any check. It didn't matter the amount?
It didn't matter.
With respect to approving invoices, was the ultimate approvement of payment the signing of the check?
Say that again.
That's okay. We talked a little bit about approving invoices. Did an approved invoice mean that a check had to be signed?
Yes.
Could the person signing the check decide not to sign the check?
Yes.
And so if, for example, Alan Weisselberg approved an invoice, did somebody have to sign that check, or was there still another level of approval?
If Alan approved it, no. I would put it in and cut it and get it signed.
What if you cut a check from the DJT account? Did Mr. Trump have to sign the check because Mr. Weisselberg approved it?
No. If he didn't want to sign it, he didn't sign it.
Did you ever see situations where he didn't sign checks?
Yes.
What would happen in those situations?
He would write void on it and send it back.
How do you know he would write void on it?
It was signed in a Sharpie in black. That is what he usually uses.
In the 24 years that you have been there, have you seen Mr. Trump's handwriting?
Yes.
And his signature?
Yes.
Are you familiar with his handwriting?
Yes.
And are you familiar with his signature?
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about the period in early 2017 after Mr. Trump became president. Do you know what the DJT Revocable Trust is?
I know it's a checking account.
So you know it has a checking account. Do you handle accounts payable for that account as well?
Yes.
And do you handle accounts payable for that account the same way you do for the DJT accounts we just discussed and all the accounts you handle?
Yes.
Do you recall when you started handling the DJT Revocable Trust account?
When they started it.
Was that when he became president in 2017?
I don't recall when it came into effect.
Do you recall if there was two specific requirement that two people sign checks over $10,000 for the Revocable Trust?
There was a time, yes.
And going now, we talked a little bit about the DJT account. Once Mr. Trump became president, did he still sign all the checks for that account?
For which one?
For the DJT, his personal account?
His personal, yes.
I want to talk a little bit about, I want to direct your attention to the period of 2017. You worked with Michael Cohen?
Yes.
Did he leave the Trump Organization at some point?
Yes.
Do you recall when he left?
No.
Was it around the time that Mr. Trump became president?
I don't recall.
Do you recall processing payments to Michael Cohen after he left the Trump Organization?
I do believe so, yes.
And were those payments that were paid from the DJT account that we talked about a little while ago?
Yes.
Do you recall generally how the payments to Michael Cohen after he left the Trump Organization were processed in 2017?
Yes.
How were they processed?
The same way that everything else is processed.
So for each payment, did you get an invoice?
Yes.
Did you get an approval email?
Yes.
Do you remember who you would get those emails from?
Jeffrey McConney.
Did you enter each invoice into the multi-data system?
Yes.
And did you cut a check for each invoice?
Yes.
If I may, I would like to show the witness the drive. Ms. Tarasoff, this contains exhibits marked Peoples 1 through 34, 41, and 42 for identification. Are all of those records that are kept by the Trump Organization in the ordinary course of business?
Yes.
Before testifying here today, did you have a chance to review the documents on the thumb drive?
Yes.
How do you know that is the thumb drive that you reviewed?
My signature and the date is on them.
Are there redactions on some of the exhibits on the thumb drive?
Yes.
Did you have a chance to review the unredacted versions of each exhibit and compare them to the redacted versions?
Yes.
Were the two sets of exhibits the same except for the redactions?
Yes.
And are the records contained on there the kinds of records we have been discussing, including checks, stapled invoices, general ledger vouchers, some emails, and a set of canceled checks?
Yes.
Were the records kept in the ordinary course of business at the Trump Organization?
Yes.
Was it part of the ordinary course of the Trump Organization's business to keep and maintain these records?
Yes.
Were the people keeping and maintaining the records under a business duty to do so accurately?
Yes.
Were the entries reflected in each of the records made at or close to the time to the activity that they reflect?
Yes.
Judge, at this time I'm offering Peoples 1 to 34 and Peoples 41 and 42 into evidence.
Subject to the discussion earlier with the objections. You want me to give the number to the objections, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Based on our discussion earlier, we object to Exhibit 8, 11, 14, 17, 20, 23, 26, 29, 32, and 42 for the reasons stated.
Thank you. Peoples 1 through 34, 41, and 42 are accepted into evidence as business records. You can still voice your objection.
Thank you, Judge. I want to talk a little about 2017 before we start looking at the records. In 2017, after Mr. Trump became the president, did anything change with respect to how checks were signed for the DJT account?
No.
In other words, he had to sign all the personal checks still?
From his personal account, yes.
But he was not in New York anymore, correct?
Yes.
So how would that happen?
We would send them to the White House for him to sign.
So even when he was in D.C., no one else had authority to sign those checks?
That's right.
Did you prepare the checks for signature the same way that you always have?
Yes.
Do you know how the checks were sent to D.C.?
By Federal Express.
If you know, who did that at the Trump Organization?
I think at the time Rebecca Minocchio did.
How did she get the checks?
I gave them to her.
And then, do you know what would happen with the checks when they went to D.C.?
No.
Did you at some point, do you know whether the checks were sent to the White House or somewhere else?
I don't know. Did you at some point get the checks back?
Yes.
And would they be signed?
Yes.
By who?
Mr. Trump.
And then, once you got them back, what would you do with the signed check and the backup? I would pull them apart, mail the check, and file the backup.
When you say file the backup, you would put it into the records of the Trump Organization?
Yes.
I would like to now, if we could, pull up what's already in evidence as People's Exhibit 37A. If we could just blow up the top email. Ms. Tarasoff, can you tell us, is this an email that you received?
Yes.
What's the date?
February 14th, 2017.
And can you tell us, if you could read that into the record and then tell us what you did once you received that email.
I was given instructions to pay this invoice from the trust and post to legal expenses.
If we could just scroll down a couple of pages. There, that's great. Is this the invoice?
Yes.
Page 2 of that exhibit?
Yes, it looks like that.
So you got that email and it was an instruction to pay this invoice?
Yes.
We could take that down if you could pull up People's 1 in evidence. Ms. Tarasoff, if you take a look at that, is that actually the same email thread that we just looked at?
Can you make it bigger?
Sure. Can you blow up the top half of People's 1?
Basically looks like it, yes.
You see there's a stamp as you're looking at it on the right side of the document. Do you see that stamp?
Yes, I do.
What's that stamp?
That's my stamp.
So you put that there?
Yes.
It says at the top, accounts payable?
Yes.
There is some handwriting.
Did you write that handwriting? Yes.
Can you explain, first of all, at the top it says entity number. Then what did you write in there?
DJT Revocable Trust, that's what it stands for.
What you actually wrote was DJ Trev, right?
Yes, that's the little code for it.
That's the code for the DJT Revocable Trust?
Yes.
In the GL code, you wrote a number. What's that number?
51505.
What's that number?
That's legal expense.
Above the stamp, do you see that?
Yes.
Do you know what those are?
Those are the voucher numbers.
When you say the voucher numbers, what's the vouchers?
When you enter it into the computer system, once you finish, it gives you that number.
We could take that down if we could pull up People's 2 in evidence. If you could just blow up the top half for now? Can you tell us what this document is?
This is the actual voucher after I finish entering it into the system.
Do you see the voucher number that you had handwritten invoice on here somewhere?
Yes.
Where is that?
It's up on the top left if you're looking at it.
Where the highlighting is now?
Yes.
Does it indicate, is there an indication of the company?
Yes.
Is that the DJ Trev that you had written in?
Yes.
What does it say next to it?
It says the actual name of the company.
Who is the vendor on this or the payee on this voucher?
Michael Cohen.
And what is the invoice amount?
Excuse me?
What is the invoice amount?
$35,000.
And did you put something in the ledger distributions?
Yes, I put the legal expense code.
If we could blow up the bottom half of that, you see in there invoice information?
Yep.
In the invoice number, what's been put in there?
I put the date.
And the due date?
Yes.
And so is one the first of the month and one the last day of January?
The computer puts in the due date.
Okay. And the invoice date?
The invoice date I put in.
Underneath that, do you see an invoice description?
Yes.
And what does it say there?
I put in retainer for January.
And did you put that in 2 times?
The computer puts it in automatically.
Okay, where did you get that information?
From the invoice.
From the invoice that we just looked at?
Yes.
And in fact, where are you getting all of the information that you're inputting into this voucher?
From the invoice.
I just want to look at the bottom box now where it says voucher status.
Okay.
First of all, it says created by, and who's that?
Myself.
And what date did you create this on?
February 14th.
Just above that, do you see it says completed in AL, and then a number, and then CD, and then a number? What are those numbers?
That's the AP. CD is the disbursement batch.
So the CD number is the disbursement batch number?
Uh-huh, yes.
All right, we could take that down. If we could look at People's 3, I won't walk you through all of those boxes. If you could blow up the top half again. Now, is this another payment voucher?
Yes, it is.
And is it the same company indicated?
Yes.
Who is the payee?
Michael Cohen.
What's the invoice amount?
$35,000.
And what's the ledger distribution?
Legal expense?
Did you put that information in there?
Yes.
And where did you get that?
From the invoice.
And it has the same general ledger account code?
Yes.
If we could look at the bottom. Now, if we could look at People's 4. If you could first blow up the 2/3 of that. Ms. Tarasoff, what is this?
That's a copy of a check.
What are these 2 parts of the check?
Stubs.
Can we just look, are the 2 stubs the same?
Yes.
Could we just blow up the top part of the first stub? Perfect. If you look at that, how much is that check for?
The check is $70,000.
If you look just above that, is the description in 2 different line items?
Yes.
What are the 2 line items?
One is for January, and one is for February.
Is each one for the same amount?
Yes.
How much is that?
$35,000.
So would it be fair to say that this check, were the 2 vouchers that we just looked at, did the information from those vouchers get put into these stubs, and was this check generated by those 2 vouchers?
Yes.
By the MDS system?
Yes.
So this is one check for $70,000, but it's for 2 different payments?
Yes.
And at the bottom left, what does it say?
To Michael Cohen.
If we could take that down, and if we could actually look at the check itself, is this a check from the DJT Revocable Trust account?
Yes, it is.
And who is it to the order of?
Michael Cohen.
And do you see the 2 signature lines there?
Yes.
First of all, can you read what's typed above those 2 lines?
2 signatures needed on amounts over $10,000.
What's the check amount here?
$70,000.
And what's the check number?
138.
Now, do you recognize the 2 signatures there?
Yes, I do.
Whose signatures are those?
The top one is Eric, and the bottom one is Alan Weisselberg.
When you say Eric,
Eric Trump.
I also just want to ask you, do you see that it says void in 3 places on the check?
Yes.
Can you explain that?
When you make a photocopy, the word void comes up.
So the check itself was not void, but when you photocopy it, that's what happens?
Yes.
Okay, take the check itself down. We talked a little bit earlier about how you would prepare checks to be signed. So was this entire document presented to whoever was going to be signing the check?
Yes.
And it was stapled on top of the invoice?
Yes.
And the invoice was the first exhibit we looked at which had your stamp on it. Is that right?
Yes.
So there would have been that. And this stapled on top?
Yes.
If we could now look at People's 378, can we just pull out the top email? What is this?
It's an email from Jeff.
To
Alan.
And who else?
And me.
And what's the date?
March 16th, 2017.
And what does it say?
It says, Deb, please pay. Post to same GL as last month. Thanks, Jeff.
What does that all mean to you?
I do the same thing as I did the month before.
This is another, can I call it an approval email?
Yes.
And based on getting this email, you undertake the process we talked about with respect to exhibits 1 through 4?
Yes.
Now, if you could pull up if you could just blow up the top email and enough of it so that the whole stamp is visible. Actually, if you could take that down, if you could go to the middle email and blow that up. Is this the same email that we were just looking at?
It does look like it, yes.
Now, if you could blow up the top part of the exhibit again. What, is this an email? Do you respond to Mr. McConney when he says, please pay?
Yes.
What do you say?
Sure, will do.
What does the stamp on the right side of the page as you look at it indicate?
That's my stamp again.
So, does that indicate that you said will do, and then you did?
Yes.
And again, the information in that stamp, what entity is going to be paying this?
JJ Trev.
What's the amount?
$35,000.
What's the general ledger code?
Legal expense.
What was the voucher number that this is associated with?
The voucher number is 846907.
If we could take that down, if you could pull up people 6. If we could just if you can blow up the whole screen, less the blank part of the page. Can you read that, Ms. Tarasoff?
Yes, I can.
What's the voucher number on this voucher?
846907.
And the entity that's going to be paying?
DJ Trev.
Who is going to be paid?
Michael Cohen.
In what amount?
$35,000.
What is the ledger distribution description?
Legal expense.
The account this money is coming, or the general ledger code this is being coded to?
Legal expense.
And that's the 50515?
Yes.
If you look on the left side as you're looking at it, do you see an invoice description?
Yes.
What's the invoice description here?
I put retainer for March.
Of 2017?
Yes.
And again, at the bottom, you see that it was created by you?
Yes.
Is there a check number on there?
Yes.
What's the check number here?
147.
And that check number should correlate to the check that's generated to pay this invoice? Is that right?
Yes.
If we could pull up what's in evidence as People's 7. And what is this?
A copy of a check.
And if we could blow up one of the stubs. And what account is this coming from, or is this check related to?
GA Trev.
Who's going to be receiving this check?
Michael Cohen.
What's the description?
Retainer for March 2017.
And the invoice amount?
$35,000.
And is there a check number on the stub?
Yes.
What is it?
147.
If we can go down and blow up the check itself, what's the amount on this check?
$35,000.
Is it made out to Michael Cohen?
Yes, it is.
Do you recognize the signatures on this check?
Yes, I do.
Whose signatures are those?
The top one is Donald Trump Jr. The bottom one is Alan Weisselberg.
Thank you. We can take that down if you could pull up People's 37C. If we could just blow up the top part of that. Ms. Tarasoff, is that an email to you?
Looks like it.
Who is it from?
Jeff McConney.
What's the date?
March 13th, 2017.
And what does the body of the email say?
It says, please pay.
We could take that down? What date did you...
It says April 13th, 2017.
Thank you. We can take that down and go to page 2. Page 3. If you could blow up the part with the writing on it. Ms. Tarasoff, what is this?
It's an invoice.
Is this the invoice that was attached to the email we just looked at?
Yes.
Who is it an invoice from?
Michael Cohen.
For what amount?
$35,000.
And what does it say the $35,000 is for?
The retainer agreement.
We can take that down. You could put up People's 8. Is this that same invoice with one difference? Does it have your stamp on it?
Yes.
Again, you put the stamp on there?
Yes.
And you wrote in the information contained in there?
Yes.
Now, what account is this coming from?
Now it's coming from Mr. Trump, personally.
How can you tell that?
Because I wrote DJT.
That's instead of DJ Trev. So essentially, the entity code, you switched the code from the revocable trust to the Trump account.
Yes.
Is it the same dollar amount?
Yes.
And the same general ledger code, 51505?
Yes.
We can take that down if we could pull up People's 9. Again, blow up that's perfect, thank you. Now, is this another MDS voucher?
Yes, it is.
What's the voucher number?
858770.
Now, if you look at company just below that, what's the company?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
Okay, the name of the company is Donald J. Trump.
Yes.
So this month it switched from the revocable trust to Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Who is the payee?
Michael Cohen.
What's the amount?
$35,000.
And if you look at ledger distributions, what's the description there?
Retainer April 2017.
Sorry, that was the invoice description, right?
Oh, yes.
Thank you, because that was going to be next. Then, can you go to the other side of the page? Ledger distribution.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's legal expense. 51505.
And what's the amount?
$35,000.
What's the check number on this?
2740.
Now, if we could pull up People's 10, again, just looking at one of the stubs, what is the account that this check is being drawn off of?
It's coming out of Mr. Trump's personal account.
Who's the payee?
Michael Cohen.
And what is the description?
Retainer for April 2017.
And the invoice amount?
$35,000.
Now, I want you to look directly below that. Do you see check date?
Yes.
What's the check date?
June 19th, 2017.
Now, do you recall why the April check ended up with a June 19th check date?
No.
If we could pull up what's in evidence as People's 41, if we could just blow up the top portion of that page, do you recognize what that is?
Yes. It's a copy of a notice saying that I voided the check.
What month was the check voided for?
I voided it in June.
I'm sorry, what was the check date?
Oh, the check date was April 18th, 2017.
Does that refresh your memory that the April check was lost?
It was probably lost, yes.
And then reissued?
Reissued.
If we could go to page 2 of this exhibit. Thank you. Can we blow up the top portion of this? Can you tell us what this is?
That's a copy of the stop payment report that we get from the bank.
Is that something that you do as a routine matter when you lose a check?
Yes. When we put a stop, you get this confirmation.
And when you get the confirmation, you put that in the file?
Yes.
And is this for that check that was dated in April?
Yes.
Thank you. We can take that down. Does that refresh your memory that April check and then reissued later on in June?
Should have been, yes.
If we could pull up People's 37D, just blow up the top portion. Yes. Is this another email from Mr. McConney to you?
Yes.
What's the date on this?
May 22nd, 2017.
Does it have an attachment from what you can see?
Yes.
What's the body of the email?
The body of the email says, Deb, please pay.
Is this another approval email?
Yes.
If we could pull up People's 11, is this the invoice for May attached to that email?
Yes.
Does it have your approval stamp on it?
Yes.
Or your accounts payable stamp?
Excuse me. Yes.
Who sent this invoice in?
Michael Cohen.
We could take that down. Pull up People's 12. Now, is this the MDS voucher related to that invoice?
Yes.
Does it have the invoice description in there?
Yes.
What is that?
Retainer for May 2017.
And this is being drawn from which account?
From Mr. Trump's personal account.
And paid to?
Michael Cohen.
What's the amount?
$35,000.
We could pull up People's 13 in evidence. Is this the stub related to the check that was generated?
Yeah.
Who is the payee?
Michael Cohen.
What's the amount of the check?
$35,000.
The description?
Retainer, May 2017.
And the account that it's being drawn from?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
If we can just look at the check itself. At the top left, do you see the name of the account?
Yes.
What's the name on the account?
Donald J. Trump.
And the check amount?
$35,000.
Who is it being paid to?
Michael Cohen.
And do you see a signature there?
Yes.
Whose signature is that?
Mr. Trump's.
Now, did you every month for the rest of the year cut a check to Michael Cohen for $35,000?
If I got an invoice, approved invoice, yes.
If we could pull up People's 375? If we could just blow up the top email. In looking at that, can you read the body of the email to us?
It says, Deb, please pay June and put a stop on the April 13th, 2017. Check number 2639 cut out of DJT and replace it. Any questions? Please call me. Thanks, Jeff.
That is an email to you?
Yes.
From Mr. McConney?
Yes.
Is that another approval email?
Yes.
Does that also help explain what happened to the April check?
Yes.
What's the date of this email?
June 16th, 2017.
If we could pull up People's 15, is this the MDS voucher associated with the invoice for June?
Yes.
And does it have the information that you entered into the MDS system?
Yes.
If we could pull up People's 16, if we could just take a look at the check, what account is this drawn on?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
Who is being paid?
Michael Cohen.
How much?
$35,000.
And do you recognize the signature?
Yes, I do.
Whose signature is that?
Mr. Trump's.
Thank you, you can take that down. Now, if we could pull up People's 17, can we blow up sort of the middle portion of that? Do you recognize what this is?
Yes.
What is this?
It's an email, an invoice.
An invoice?
Uh-huh.
Do you know what month it relates to?
July.
And who is the invoice from?
Michael Cohen?
Who did he send that to?
Alan Weisselberg.
Whose handwriting is that at the bottom? Do you know?
Mine.
What does it say?
It says, pay same amount per Alan and Jeff. It doesn't have the amount, so I asked what amount I should pay.
When you say same amount, what did that mean to you?
$35,000.
So, the same amount that you've been paying January, February, March, April, May, June?
Yes.
Is that your stamp again on this invoice?
Yes.
We can take that down. Sorry, could you put that back up for 1 second? And was this invoice for services rendered in the month of July?
Yes.
2017?
Yes.
Thank you. You can take that down. Did you enter the information from the invoice into the MDS system the way you usually do?
Yes.
If we could just pull up People's 18, just blow up the top portion. Is this the MDS voucher that relates to that invoice?
Yes.
If you look in the invoice description, what does it say?
Retainer, July 2017.
And if we could pull up what is in evidence as People's 19, if you could just blow up the check, which account is this being drawn on?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
And the money is going to who?
Michael Cohen.
The amount?
$35,000.
And do you recognize the signature on this?
Yes, I do.
Whose signature is that?
Mr. Trump's.
And if you can take down just the blow up for a moment, and just to remind us, So this document would have been stapled to that invoice and presented for signature. Is that how you did it?
Yes.
Now, if we could go to People's 20, do you recognize this?
Yes.
And what is this?
It's another invoice.
For what month?
Looks like August.
And again, is it for Michael Cohen?
Yes.
And is it for services rendered that month?
Yes.
Does it have an amount in the invoice?
I don't see it on this part. No.
Is that your stamp down below?
Yes.
Based on that stamp, do you believe that you got an approval email for this invoice?
Yes.
And what's the amount written in there?
$35,000.
And what's the entity?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
And what's the general ledger code here?
51505. Legal.
If we could pull up People's 21, just blow up the top portion. Is this the MDS voucher associated with that invoice?
Yes.
If you look at the invoice description, what does it say?
Retainer for August 2017.
What account is this payment going to be drawn from?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
And what amount?
$35,000.
Could you pull up People's 22? Is this the check generated from that voucher?
Yes.
Who is it paid to?
Michael Cohen.
From what account?
Mr. Trump's account.
The amount?
$35,000.
And do you recognize that signature?
Yes, I do.
Whose signature is that?
Mr. Trump's.
Judge, would this be a right time for a break?
Yes, I think so. Jurors, let's take our afternoon recess.
All rise, whereupon the jurors and the alternate jurors are excused.
You can step down, Ms. Tarasoff. Whereupon the witness is excused. Whereupon a recess is taken. Let's get the witness, please.
Witness entering. The witness, Deborah Tarasoff, enters the courtroom and resumed the witness stand.
Let's get the jury, please.
All rise. Jury entering. Jury enters.
You may be seated.
Case on trial continued. All jurors are present and properly seated.
Mr. Conroy.
Thank you, Judge. I think as we were walking through those exhibits, I missed one. So if we could pull up People's 14. And do you recognize what this is? And can we put that up for everybody? Thank you. Ms. Tarasoff, what is this?
That looks like another invoice. Can you make it a little bit bigger?
Sure. Can we blow up the middle portion?
That's enough. Thank you. It's another invoice.
And what's the date on it?
June 16th, 2017.
And can you just read what it says under Dear Alan?
Pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of May 2017 and June 2017. Thank you. Michael Cohen.
And is that another invoice that you processed and we already discussed the other documents related to it?
Yes.
If we could pull up People's 24? I'm sorry. Can we do People's 23 first? And Ms. Tarasoff, if we could blow up just the middle portion of this.
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the months of August and September 2017. Thank you. Michael Cohen.
And if you could take down the blow up. And do you see the accounts payable stamp there?
Yes.
Did you put that stamp there?
Yes.
And what account did this come from?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
Now, if we could pull up People's 24, and if we could just pull out the top part, who's the entity paying?
The entity is Donald Trump.
And the invoice description?
Retainer, September 2017.
And what's the amount?
$35,000.
And I'm not sure I've asked you this. How does a check get generated once you put this information into your MDS system and this voucher is created?
A printer prints it out.
And how does that, do you have to hit a button or something?
Yes.
So whenever you're ready for it, there is a way.
I schedule it.
You can schedule it through the MDS system and it
Prints it out.
prints it out. And if we could pull up People's 25, and is this what the check prints out on?
Yes.
Obviously without the signature.
Yes.
If we could just blow up the check itself, what account is this drawn on?
From Mr. Trump's personal account.
And who is it going to be paid to?
Michael Cohen.
The amount?
$35,000.
And do you recognize that signature?
Yes, I do.
Whose is it?
Mr. Trump's.
If we could now pull up People's 26. And again, if we could just blow up just the top part first. And is this another invoice?
Yes, it is.
Would you just read the body of the invoice for us?
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of October 2017. Thank you. Michael Cohen.
And if you take down just the blow up, is that your accounts payable stamp?
Yes, it is.
Could we pull up what's in evidence as People's 27? And is this the MDS voucher associated with that invoice?
Yes, it is.
And what is the invoice description?
Retainer, October 2017.
What's the amount of the invoice?
$35,000.
And what account is this going to be drawn from?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
And if we could now pull up People's 28? And if you could just blow up the check. Thank you. Who is the account holder?
Donald Trump.
The person receiving the money?
Michael Cohen.
And what is the check amount?
$35,000.
And do you recognize that signature?
Yes, I do.
Whose signature is that?
Mr. Trump's.
Thank you. If we could now pull up what's in evidence as People's 29. And do you recognize, is this another invoice?
Yes, it is.
For what month?
November.
Of 2017.
Yes.
And can you just read us the body of the invoice?
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly payment for services rendered for the month of Bear 2017. Thank you, Michael Cohen.
Thank you. And if you could just take down the blow-up. And is that, again, the accounts payable stamp?
Yes.
And did you put that on there?
Yes.
And is that your handwriting?
Yes.
And if we could pull up People's 30. You are way ahead of me. Is this the MDS voucher associated with that invoice?
Yes.
And what's the invoice description?
Retainer, November 2017.
What account is this coming from?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
What's the amount?
$35,000.
And who is the payee?
Michael Cohen.
If we could now pull up what's in evidence as People's 31. And if you could just blow up the check portion, what account is this coming from?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
What's the amount?
$35,000.
Who is it going to?
Michael Cohen.
If you could just take down the blow up. And if I could just ask again, so this is the document that you would staple to the invoice to send out for signature?
Yes.
Now, if we could go to People's 32. And do you recognize this?
It's another invoice.
And can you just blow up the middle portion? And could you read us the body of the invoice?
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of December 2017. Thank you, Michael Cohen.
And could you pull up People's 33? Is this the MDS voucher associated with that invoice?
Yes.
And that's for December 2017?
Yes.
Which account is this coming from?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
Who is the employee?
Michael Cohen.
And what is the invoice description?
Retainer, December of 2017.
And what is the check number?
3006.
And the amount?
35,000.
And if we could pull up People's 34, and if we could just blow up the check, do you see the check number on here?
Yes.
What's the check number?
3006.
And is this again from the DJT account?
Yes, it is.
Who is the recipient of the money?
Michael Cohen.
What's the amount?
35,000.
And do you recognize that signature?
Yes, I do.
Whose signature is that?
Mr. Trump's.
Just one moment, please, Judge. Thank you, Judge. I have nothing further.
Mr. Blanche.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Tarasoff. How are you?
All right. How are you?
I'm good. We have never met before, have we?
No.
You testified a little bit about your work for the Trump Organization since 2000. Would you describe it as a family business?
Yes.
And you mentioned Eric Trump over the years, correct?
Yes.
Don Jr. over the years?
Yes, uh-huh.
How about Ivanka Trump?
Yes.
And you were asked some questions focusing on the 2016-2017's time frame. Do you remember those questions?
Yes.
And I believe you said that for many years President Trump was around a lot. He was at Trump Tower a lot. Did it change when he was running for president?
Yes.
He was around less?
Yes.
And then, obviously, when he was elected president, there was a time in between the election and the time he went to Washington, D.C., correct?
Yes.
And he was focused at that point on getting ready to be president?
I think so.
And then, obviously, and you said this, but then once in January, he left and was in Washington, D.C. for 4 years, correct?
Correct.
And you testified about the process that worked for many years with Ms. Graff, where you would take a check with an invoice to President Trump, and then you would get it back at some point, correct?
Yes.
And sometimes the check wasn't signed?
Yes.
And that happened. But the checks that we just went through for the past hour and a half, except for the one that was canceled, none of those were voided out by President Trump, correct?
Correct.
But you don't know what President Trump did at the White House or wherever he was when he signed those checks, right? He wasn't in New York for those, correct?
Correct.
And so you described the process where they would be Federal Expressed, as far as you know?
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
But that's really all you know about that process, correct?
Yes.
And I believe you testified about President Trump himself. You did not interact with him a lot over the years, correct?
Correct.
And did you and your boss, it sounded like they varied a little bit, but in 2016 and 2017, it was Mr. McConney?
Yes.
Mr. Weisselberg?
Yes.
And so, when we saw the back and forth with the emails a few minutes ago, where Mr. McConney would say, "Hey, Deb, please pay," that was what happened all the time, correct?
Yes.
And the same thing at times with Mr. Weisselberg?
Yes.
So, you didn't have authority to cut a check on your own, correct?
Correct.
So, but, is it fair to say that when you testified that you believed or you thought that Mr. Weisselberg and President Trump talked a lot, you weren't present for those conversations, right?
Right.
So when Mr. Weisselberg, on some of the emails that we saw, or Mr. McConney told you to go ahead and pay it, generate a check, you didn't get permission from President Trump himself, correct?
Correct.
And you understood that when you were told to do that by Mr. Weisselberg or by Mr. McConney, it was approved and you did it, correct?
Yes.
Now, there were a fair number of questions about the canceled check. So putting that one aside for a moment, the rest of the checks that you generated at the time, or even now, you have no reason to believe there was anything wrong with doing that, correct?
That's right.
You knew Mr. Cohen when he worked for the Trump Organization, correct?
Yes.
And you saw emails after he left saying that he was the personal attorney to President Trump.
Yes.
And during the time working for President Trump, which sounds like it was a long time, and there were a couple of years when he was president when you weren't working for him direct, correct?
Correct.
But the time prior to that, you never had any reason to believe that President Trump was hiding anything or anything like that, correct?
Correct.
If I may just have one more moment.
Defense counsel confer.
Thank you, Ms. Tarasoff. I have no further questions.
Just one moment.
ADAs confer.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tarasoff. You can step down.
Thank you.